There is a thing that happens to the eye before it fails completely. It does not go dark. What it does is dissolve, the edges first, then the center, until the world becomes something you remember rather than something you see. A smear of light where the past should be. A shape that might be a man or might be the rock face behind him. You hold very still and try to decide which one it is, and the effort of deciding is its own kind of exhaustion. My eyes began failing 3 days before the Persians arrived at Thermopylae. I told no one. Not because I was ashamed. Shame is for men who chose what happened to them. I told no one because there was nothing to say. The pass was narrow. The men on my left and right had held it for 2 days already. The wall at our backs, Leonidas at our front. The arithmetic was not complicated. Telling someone about my eyes would have required them to respond. I did not want their response. What I had instead was this. The sound of the Aegean below the pass. Constant. Something that had been there before any of us and would be there after. The weight of my aspis, 22 pounds of bronze and poplar wood, distributed across my left forearm the way it had been distributed across my left forearm since I was 18 years old. The specific roughness of my spear shaft, where my right hand had worn it smooth over 20 years of grip. These things I could still feel. I held onto them the way you hold onto a wall when the ground is uncertain. The man beside me was called Deinachus. He is the one who said that if the Persians fire enough arrows to blot out the sun, we will fight in the shade. He said it casually, the way a man discusses weather. I heard him say it. I was standing close enough to touch him. What I remember is not the line. The line is already famous. It does not need me. What I remember is the silence that came after it. The way the men around him did not cheer. They laughed, quietly, and then they went back to what they were doing. That was the Spartan thing, not the bravery, the going back. I had been going back for 20 years. My first battle was on the Eurytus plain, a training engagement that went wrong in the way engagements involving 18-year-old boys tend to go wrong. I took a spear butt to the side of the head, went down, came back up, and stood in the line for 3 more hours without knowing where I was. By the time it was finished, I had bled through the left side of my tunic, and I did not know how it had happened. That is what the first one teaches you. Not courage, not technique. It teaches you that your body knows things your mind does not, and that the best thing your mind can do is stay out of the way. I had been staying out of the way ever since. At Thermopylae, what my mind wanted to do was count. When you cannot trust what you see, you trust what you can quantify. How many steps to the man on my left? How many steps to the rock wall on my right? How many heartbeats between one wave of them and the next? How many of us were still standing? On the first day, 300. On the second day, 291. On the morning of the third day, I stopped counting the ones who were still standing and started counting something else. I counted what I could still hear. Aristodemus came to me before dawn on the third day. He was a Spartan of my generation, which meant he was the kind of man who would rather carry a piece of bad news than let it sit. He told me plainly. Leonidas had given the order. The men whose eyes were failing, Aristodemus and I were the two named, were to leave the pass, return to Sparta, fight another day. I remember looking in the direction of his voice. My eyes at that point gave me an outline, a shape, the general suggestion of a man. I remember thinking that he looked the way a messenger looks when he knows the message is a gift the recipient will not want. I said nothing for a long time. The thing you need to understand about the Spartan education, the agoge, which begins at 7 and does not end until you are dead. It does not teach you how to be brave. Anyone can be taught a posture that looks like bravery. What the agoge teaches is something stranger and more durable. It teaches you that the self is not the point, that the self is, in fact, the main obstacle. 23 years of that education leaves a man in a particular relationship with his own discomfort. You learn to observe it the way you observe weather. Yes, it is raining. Yes, my knee hurts. Yes, I am frightened. These are facts. They do not determine what happens next. What determines what happens next is the line. The line was behind me. 300 men, or what was left of them, arranged in a pass so narrow that 5 men abreast was a crowd. At their front, Leonidas. And somewhere beyond the far end of the pass, the Persian army. Xerxes, 300,000 men by Herodotus's count. Any number above a certain threshold produces the same effect in the body of a man standing opposite it. I asked Aristodemus what he was going to do. He said he did not know yet. That was the most honest thing I heard at Thermopylae. I told my helot to bring my spear and my shield. He started to say something. I told him to be quiet. He was quiet. I had him lead me to the line. The Thermopylae pass at its narrowest point is 15 meters wide. My helot walked beside me, his hand on my arm, and I counted his steps and mine. Somewhere around the 35th step, I stopped counting because I could hear them. Not see, hear. The Persians were not a sound like anything else. Every army has a sound. The clank of equipment, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the specific low noise of men who are trying to be quiet and failing. The Persians had all of that, but underneath it was something else, a murmur that was not voices, not equipment, not feet. It was the sound of a crowd so large that its own existence generates a frequency, like standing near water you cannot see. I felt it in my feet, then in my chest, then in the back of my teeth. My helot stopped walking. I understood that we had reached the rear of the formation. I could smell the men, iron, sweat, blood that had dried and blood that had not. I could hear the specific breathing of men who have been standing in a line for 2 days. A shallow breath, controlled, keeping the body flat and small. I had breathed like that for 2 days myself. I reached out and found a man's shoulder. I do not know whose. I put my hand there, and he did not turn around, which was correct. You do not turn around in the line. You face forward. You stay in your place. You give the man beside you your shoulder, and you take his. I took my shield from my helot. 22 pounds of bronze and poplar wood. My left arm found the grip the way it always finds the grip. Not from thought, not from intention, but from 20 years of that specific weight in that specific position. The muscle memory of the life. I brought it up. My helot said something very quietly. I did not hear the words. I heard the tone, which was the tone of a man who understands he cannot change what is happening and has decided to bear witness to it instead. That was enough. That was more than enough. I could not see the man in front of me. I could feel his heat. I could feel the press of the formation, the slight forward lean that a line develops when it has been holding for a long time and the men in it have stopped distinguishing between the line and themselves. I leaned with it. Ahead of us, somewhere in the blur and the noise, a horn sounded. When the eyes go, the ears become something different. I do not mean they become sharper. That is the story people tell, and it is not true, or not true in any simple way. What happens is that sound stops being background and becomes foreground. Every sound becomes a piece of information you have to process because it is the only information you are getting. The creak of a shield strap, the particular scrape of a spear butt on stone, the change in a man's breathing that means he has seen something. I heard the charge before anyone else could have known it was coming, not the sound of their feet. That came later. What I heard first was the change in the Persian murmur. The frequency shifted, like water before a wave, when the surface draws back. A held breath in 300,000 throats, and then the release of it, and in the release was the charge. I braced. This is the thing they do not tell you about the phalanx. It is not the individual that holds. One man with a shield and a spear is a man with a shield and a spear. What holds is the geometry. The overlap of aspis on aspis, 8 men deep, the weight of the formation distributed through the line the way weight distributes through stone. You are not a soldier in that moment. You are a component. You are a fraction of a force that is larger than any of its parts. I was a blind component, but I was still a component. The impact came. I have been in many charges. I have been in charges where the line held and charges where it did not. The line at Thermopylae held because the pass held it. 15 meters of rock wall on each side. The Persians could not go around us. They could only come at us. And they came, and the line took them, and I was in the line, and I cannot tell you what I did because my eyes did not record it. My arms recorded it. My legs recorded it. My shield took impacts I felt through the bone of my forearm. I held the grip. I could hear men dying on both sides. The specific sound of it is not one I will describe, not because I am unwilling, but because it is not a sound that translates. It is not like anything else. Once you have heard it, you recognize it always. And once you recognize it, you cannot unrecognize it. I could hear Spartans dying. I could hear the change in the line when a man went down. I could not see the gaps. I could feel them. A gap in a phalanx is a drop in temperature. The man who is giving you heat on your left is suddenly not there. The geometry fails. You close. You do not decide to close. You close the way water closes over a stone, because the alternative is a hole in the line, and a hole in the line is the end. I closed. I do not know how many times I closed. I know the sun moved because the heat on my face changed direction. I know it moved more than once, because the heat changed direction more than once. I know I was still standing because I was still closing. At some point, the pressure from the front changed. I felt it through the formation before I could make sense of it. A different angle of impact. Men coming from a direction that should not have had men in it. The Persians had found another way through. The mountain path. Ephialtes, the traitor whose name every Spartan knows and will know forever, had shown them. They were coming around. The line did not break. The Spartans do not break lines. But the line began to move. Backward is not retreat when you are choosing where to die. It is geometry. You find the ground that gives the enemy the fewest advantages, and you stand on it, and you hold it. We moved to a small hill, a rise in the ground. Even without my eyes, I could feel the incline under my feet. the different purchase of the stone, the slight change in balance required. I planted. I do not know what I looked like. I know what I felt like. I felt like a man who has arrived somewhere he has been walking toward for a long time without knowing it. The particular calm of that, not resignation. I want to be precise about this. Not resignation, but resolution, which is a different thing. Resolution is what you have when you stop arguing with what is. The Persian arrows came. I heard them before they arrived. That is the correct order. I raised my shield by instinct, by the accumulated reflex of 20 years, and the reflex was correct, even though my eyes were not feeding it. Some of them struck the shield. I felt the impact through the grip. I held the grip. One did not strike the shield. At some point, the sounds of the battle began to change in quality. They became less immediate, less present. Not because they were stopping, but because something in me was no longer receiving them at full volume. What I heard last was the sea, the Aegean, below this pass. Constant, the way it had been when I arrived and the way it had been every morning since. The sound that had nothing to do with Persia or Sparta or the geometry of formation fighting or any of the things that had been the entire content of my life for the past 3 days. It had been there before me. It would be there after. I had not decided anything. I had simply not left. There is a difference, and I knew it then. The way I had known it when Aristodemus came to me before dawn and told me what Leonidas had said, and I had been quiet for a long time. And then I had asked my helot for my shield. The shield is a poplar wood core with a bronze facing, 22 pounds. In 20 years, my left arm has never learned to feel its absence. It did not feel its absence now. Herodotus will write my name. He will call me brave. He will not ask what I heard in the end, when the only sense I had left was working perfectly. The sea, constant, mine.